I'd like to introduce adding materials to our surfaces. I created from this curve, created a curve in the x-axis or from the front view, and I used revolve to create this form here. And if I go to my attribute editor, again, there's packets of nodes. The last one will always be our shader, our material that's applied to our object. This one here is Lambert 1, and this is the default shader, the default material. You don't want to adjust any of these attributes. You don't want to adjust the attributes of the default material. Leave the default material. Otherwise, whatever you've adjusted here will be applied to any new objects that you make in your scene. So leave it this kind of medium gray. In order to add a material, what we're going to do is jump over to the rendering shelf. And here we can work with, we'll have lights, and then here are our materials. So all materials start with a type of shader, and the shader is just the set of specifications or attributes that you're able to manipulate in order to achieve a particular look. Normally it has to do with the way that light is going to virtually bounce off of these objects. So how shiny or matte it is. So this here is the Lambert shader, and you can see it here, that it doesn't have any specularity. It doesn't have any light that's bouncing off of it. It's a purely matte material. So if I want to work with Lambert, I would select my surface here and just add a different Lambert. I would add Lambert 2. So now Lambert 2 has been applied. And I can see that here at the end of my attribute list here, that Lambert 2 is now applied. And now this is a material that I can manipulate. So I can manipulate a lot of different attributes about this shader. I can change its color, its value here. I can choose a color. I can make it transparent. I can give it some kind of ambient color. And then these two together work to give a kind of glow effect, okay, incandescence and ambient color. Then there's some other options here for diffuse, so how, and translucence and things. But for Lambert, I would mostly be working with these values here to adjust. Okay, so that's one. Let me turn down the ambient color here. Let me go ahead and duplicate. Maybe I'll duplicate special, the shape. And this attribute will be duplicated along with it. The material will be applied as well. So I'm just going to make a couple copies here. Let's make maybe 5 copies, and let's just translate them in the X and the Z direction by maybe 15. This is a pretty big shape compared to my, maybe even bigger. Maybe I need it like 50 by 50. And then let's also rotate them in the X direction 180. So we'll just flip each one. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and say duplicate special. And now it's made copies, kind of a number of different copies. Some of them are right side up, some of them are upside down. Maybe I don't need 6 of them. Maybe I just need maybe that's a little bit far. Maybe 20 will be good. Let's just make 3 copies. Okay. And now again, I can kind of move them apart from each other a little bit and give them some space. You can select each one individually again. So in order to, let me move these up. I'll move them up together so they're at the same level. I can shift select both of these, move them up a bit. Okay, so Let's add a different material now to this object. I'm going to turn the grid off so I don't see it. And let's add a blend material. And blend has specularity to it. So we have this other option here for specular shading. So again, I'll give this a color. And maybe this one I'll make a little bit transparent. And I will turn up that specular highlight. You can see here on the object, right? The default lighting, it's becoming brighter. I can also change the size of it. So it has a kind of like just a brighter spot. And then the roll off, it's, you know, how sharp or soft the, from the center of the specular to the edges, okay? So I can mess with those properties. Maybe for this one back here, I will choose a Phong material. And I'm going to choose a blue color. And Phong is like blend, but it's kind of, it's a little bit less, the surface appears to be less rough and a little bit more shiny. So the specularity seems to be, specular seems to be a little bit sharper, where blend has a kind of softer quality. Phong is a little bit shinier. I can also increase the reflectivity, and what that will do is the other objects will reflect when I render on my object. And maybe for this one, I'll just leave it there. I'll give it a pretty big specular highlight, or a big enough specular highlight, and turn up the reflectivity. And then for this final object here, I'll choose a Phong E. So these are, or actually for this final object, these are all Maya shaders that you're welcome to use. We also have Arnold shaders. So this last object, I'll give an Arnold shader. And Arnold is the renderer we're going to be using to render our scene. So renderers all have different properties, but the Arnold renderer is a high quality renderer, whereas the others, Maya comes standard with Arnold now, but Maya's standard renderers kind of do a pretty poor job at rendering the scene. They're very fast, but the result isn't nearly as clear. So we'll use an Arnold shader here. And you know, just that being said, just so that you know, if you would use different shaders, you would use different shaders for different things. So if we're rendering using the Arnold shader is great, but if I'm going to be exporting these, let's say for a game engine, or for some kind of use in a virtual reality or augmented reality experience, then I'm going to want to use Maya shaders as some of the standard shaders. I'm not going to want to use an Arnold shader. It won't transfer over. Anyhow, I have my standard surface shader here, and again, there's many more options here. I actually have all of these sub-menus when working with Arnold renderer. So I have my color, and let me choose maybe a yellow, and I have a diffuse roughness. It gives it a rough quality. These are all different things that we can play with. How metallic it is, how shiny. This is going to be a kind of gold cup if I turn that metal all the way out. I have, again, options to maybe change the color of the highlight. If I want to add a kind of red tint to it, which you can't really see here in the viewport, but when we render it, you might be able to see that happen. And then I have things like the roughness of the specular highlights. And then this also deals with how that specular highlight behaves. Then I have things like transmission, subsurface. These are different things you can play with to, if you want to start to, these are really to create really highly realistic renders. So if they have, like, for example, car paint has a kind of color value to it, but then it also seems to have a gloss that like lays on top of the paint. Then we have something like a coat kind of add that gloss. It adds a kind of thickness to the material. Sheen and emission, and all of these things kind of allow you to manipulate, and we're not going to get into it here, but it allows you to manipulate the quality of the material to kind of recreate things like water or things that have a viscosity to them, that have refraction and whatnot. Okay, so that's the basics of adding material, pretty simple. The last thing I want to mention is I'm able to add material to components of objects. So I can choose that surface patch and add a different material to it. So I added a standard surface to that already existing blend, and we can change that value. So you can add material to whole objects, and you can also add material to components of objects. And this will become increasingly important when we are talking about modeling, more in-depth modeling in the coming weeks. How to create your models with some of that in mind to apply materials or textures and things. So the shape and the form, the topology of the model becomes important.